The cruiser Iron Resolve was not built for comfort. It was a warship, its steel bones stretched thin across the border between human territory and the Draken expanse. Everything about it, from the flicker of worn-out lights to the hum of its reactors, spoke of endless patrols, long deployments, and the quiet dread that something was always out there in the dark. Lieutenant Mark Calder knew that dread well. He had fought enough battles to recognize when silence wasn't peace but the pause before something worse. Still, nothing in his years of service had prepared him for what the crew had pulled from the wreckage drifting near the nebula. They called her the Survivor at first. She wasn't human, though at a glance she could almost pass. Tall and lean, her skin bore patterns that shimmered faintly like liquid metal etched into flesh. Her eyes carried a glow so faint it could be mistaken for a reflection of the ship's lights, until they shifted on their own, pulsing with her emotions. And then there was the tail. It wasn't some decorative appendage or useless evolutionary leftover. It moved with purpose, curling, flicking, coiling with silent precision. Along its length were faint lines like veins of light buried deep under her skin. Whenever she exhaled too sharply, they glimmered. They locked her in the brig. She hadn't resisted the rescue or the restraints, only watched in silence as humans worked around her, occasionally muttering words in a tongue that sounded like breaking glass and rolling thunder. Their translators couldn't keep up, so she stayed mostly silent, studying everything with the calm of a predator behind glass. Mark wasn't even supposed to be down there. His shift ended hours ago, but something pulled him toward the brig, toward the alien woman sitting so still she could have been carved from stone. The guards at the door looked uneasy. One of them muttered, "She's been staring at the wall for 3 hours. Doesn't blink much. Gives me the creeps." Mark stepped inside anyway. For a moment, they simply regarded each other through the energy barrier. Her gaze was sharp but not hostile. Curious, maybe. As if she were trying to decide whether humans were worth her time. Mark had seen prisoners before, smugglers, pirates, even captured Draken scouts. Most were angry or defiant, spitting curses or begging for freedom. This one was different. She carried herself like someone who had already lost everything but refused to break. He should have walked away. Instead, the words slipped out before he could stop himself. Half a joke, half an attempt to pierce the silence. "Nice tail." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Her legs gave out as though his words had been a weapon. She hit the floor, catching herself with trembling arms. A choked sound escaped her throat, nothing like the composed silence she had held until now. Her entire body shook, her chest heaving like someone drowning in open air. Then the glow under her skin flared. Lines along her tail ignited in a blinding surge of blue, heat rolling off her in waves that made the brig's air shimmer. The tail itself burst into flame. Not fire as humans knew it, but living energy, wild and hungry. The metal walls hissed, scorched black where the light licked against them. Alarms screamed. Guards rushed forward with weapons raised, but none dared fire, not with the brig threatening to melt around them. Mark stood frozen, not with fear, but with recognition. She wasn't detonating like a bomb. She was fighting something inside herself, something too big for her body to hold. Her eyes snapped to him, blazing now like twin suns. For the first time, she spoke in a voice broken but clear, each syllable laced with a weight that made the hair on his arms rise. War. The flame roared higher, filling the brig with light. In that instant, Mark understood this woman wasn't just a refugee. She was a weapon, and the war she spoke of was already here. The alarms didn't stop when the fire died down. Even after the brig sealed its bulkheads, the smell of scorched metal clung to the air like smoke after a battlefield. The alien woman lay curled on the deck, her chest rising and falling as though every breath was a fight. Mark waved the guards back. "Lower your rifles." "She's not attacking! She lit half the room on fire!" one snapped, sweat dripping down his face. "What the hell do you call that?" Mark crouched closer, ignoring the burn marks on the deck. "Control," he muttered. "If she wanted us dead, we'd be ash." The woman opened her eyes then, faint light flickering behind them. Her voice cracked but pushed through. "No. Control." It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what Mark suspected. The fire wasn't an attack. It was a burden. They transferred her from the brig to an isolated chamber built for hazardous materials. The medics couldn't scan her properly. Their equipment shorted whenever it came close. So Mark stayed with her, questioning, listening, and piecing together her story one fragment at a time. Her name, or something close enough for a human tongue, was Alira. She came from a people called the Veilori, a species humanity knew almost nothing about. But as she spoke in broken English, halting and weary, her words painted a picture that chilled Mark to his bones. The Veilori were nearly gone, hunted, entire fleets erased by the Draken, the scaled predators that had already made humanity's border worlds bleed. Alira wasn't just a survivor, she was a target. The tail, glowing faintly even in its dormant state, wasn't decoration. It was a conduit, a weapon, a living fusion of biology and energy older than her civilization itself. The Veilori carried the flame as both gift and curse. It gave them the power to cut through warships, to burn armies into nothing, but each use devoured them. Slowly, Alira had survived longer than most, but every time she unleashed the flame, it burned away more of her life. That was why she buckled. That was why she had collapsed. The power wasn't designed to be contained forever. Mark pressed her gently, careful not to overwhelm her. "Why were you drifting alone?" Her eyes lowered, and for a moment the glow in them dimmed. "Last of my fleet," she whispered. "They knew Draken wanted me alive. They chose death so I could run." Silence hung heavy in the chamber. Mark felt the weight of her words like a stone pressing against his chest. The Veilori had died to keep her out of enemy hands. And now she was sitting in the middle of a human warship, too weak to run, too powerful to ignore. He knew what it meant before she said it. The Draken. They come, they smell flame. They never stop. Mark leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. His instincts screamed that she was right. The Draken hadn't just been hitting random convoys. They were hunting, searching, waiting for the scent of the one weapon they couldn't let slip away. And now, thanks to blind luck or cruel fate, they knew exactly where to look. That realization spread quickly through the crew. Rumors jumped faster than Mark could stamp them out. Some whispered about keeping her locked away until she burned out on her own. Others demanded she be jettisoned before she attracted the enemy fleet. But when Mark returned to her chamber later, she wasn't begging for protection. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her tail faintly glowing, eyes locked on the stars outside the viewport. "Why don't you fight back?" Mark asked. Her gaze shifted to him, steady and unflinching. "Because every time I fight, I die more." She let the tip of her tail tap the floor. A spark leapt, blue and sharp. "But if I don't fight, they take everything." Mark had no answer. He was a soldier. Sacrifice was written into his blood. But to carry that kind of fire, knowing it would one day kill you, that was beyond human endurance. When the klaxons blared minutes later, announcing multiple contacts dropping from warp, Mark didn't need to look at the sensors. His stomach already knew. The Draken had found them. The first sign wasn't on sensors. It was the way the ship's hull seemed to shiver as though space itself recoiled. Then the warnings came. Gravity spikes, distortion fields, hull echoes. A second later, the void tore open, and the Draken fleet poured through. They didn't arrive in formation. They arrived like predators striking from every angle, jagged warships shaped like knives, wings bristling with plasma launchers, their hulls glimmering with scales as though alive. 30 ships, maybe more, instantly surrounding Iron Resolve. The bridge erupted with orders.
"Shields up!
Lock firing solutions! All hands to battle stations!" Mark sprinted into the chaos, strapping into his console as the first wave hit. The ship rocked violently, lights flickering, panels sparking. The Draken didn't probe or test. They hammered, relentless and overwhelming. Across the comms, other human patrol ships screamed distress signals. The daring light took a torpedo broadside and split in two. The Harbinger lost its reactor within seconds, going dark before being carved apart by enemy fire. Plasma bolts ripped across the void, blue-white streaks tearing through armor plating. Iron Resolve shuddered with every impact, its crew fighting to stabilize as damage reports streamed in. Mark's hands flew over controls, launching counterfire. Human cannons spat red fury, tearing chunks off Draken frigates, but for every enemy ship that limped back, 2 more surged forward. And then came the sound no one wanted to hear. "Boarding craft inbound!" The Draken weren't content to destroy the ship from outside. They meant to carve through the crew personally, tooth and claw. Mark cursed under his breath, already unstrapping. But then, across the tactical display, he caught sight of something impossible. A streak of blue fire. The crew gasped as Elira launched from the hangar bay, her form wrapped in energy, her tail burning like a comet's trail. No suit, no craft, just raw fire shielding her body against the vacuum. She moved faster than human eyes could track, carving arcs of light across the black. She slammed into the first Draken ship head-on. Her flame cut the hull like paper, splitting the vessel down its spine. The explosion lit the battlefield. Another cruiser tried to target her, but she darted aside, a blur of burning blue, and speared through its engines. The detonation hurled debris into its allies, shattering their formation. The bridge fell silent for half a heartbeat, crew frozen as they watched the alien woman burn entire warships apart with nothing but her tail aflame. Then Mark found his voice. "Don't just gawk, cover her! When she strikes, finish the job." The humans obeyed. Fighters swarmed around her path, hammering crippled Draken ships before they could recover. The coordinated assault turned chaos into order, giving Elira space to move, to keep striking. But it was not without cost. Mark watched her trajectory carefully, noting how her flame dimmed after each attack. Her movements grew sharper, desperate, as though fighting the limits of her own strength. Each explosion she caused seemed to drag her closer to collapse. The Draken noticed too. The enemy flagship, vast, plated in black scales, with a prow shaped like a beast's jaw, shifted into position. Its guns glowed, charging for a single annihilating blast. The commander of that vessel opened a channel, his face filling the bridge screens. Golden eyes gleamed above a maw lined with curved teeth. His voice was deep, resonant and dripping with hate. "The Vailori witch hides among you. Return her, or be erased." Mark stood before the screen, jaw set. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, waiting. He didn't hesitate. "You want her?" His voice carried steady, even over the trembling deck. "You'll have to rip her from us." The Draken bared his fangs in what might have been a smile. "Then you die screaming. The transmission cut." The flagship unleashed its fury. A blast the size of a small moon lit the void, tearing toward Iron Resolve. The ship's shields flared white, alarms shrieking as the barrier buckled. Metal groaned, hull plating snapped. The crew clung to consoles as gravity flickered. In that instant, Elira streaked across the battle space, her body burning brighter than it had yet. She intercepted the blast. Blue flame clashed against golden fire. The void itself seemed to scream, and for the first time, humanity saw the full cost of her gift. Her cry echoed over open comms, raw, agonized. But she held the beam at bay, her body burning like a star. Mark's throat tightened as he watched. She wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to hold the line, even if it consumed her. The bridge had gone deathly quiet. Every eye fixed on the impossible sight outside the viewport. One alien woman holding back the wrath of a flagship with nothing but her own burning body. But the balance was already shifting. The longer Elira burned, the weaker she became. The flames sputtered in fits, flickering around her form. The Draken pressed harder, tightening the noose around Iron Resolve. Mark's mind raced. Every instinct told him this wasn't sustainable. She would collapse. And when she did, nothing would stop the enemy from tearing them apart. He slammed his fist onto the comms console. "Listen to me. All ships, target where she hits. Don't waste fire anywhere else. Cover her when she falls back. Buy her seconds." His voice rose, steel in every word. "We fight with her or we die without her." For a breathless moment, only static filled the channel. Then one voice answered, "Copy that." Another followed. Then a dozen. A surge of affirmation rippled across the fleet as human captains threw their ships into formation around Elira's burning trail. The battlefield changed instantly. When she struck a Draken frigate, human guns finished the kill before it could stabilize. When she faltered, fighters swooped in, scattering enemy fire long enough for her to ignite again. The humans became her shield, her extension, her wolves hunting in tandem with the comet at their center. The Draken had expected prey. Instead, they found prey fighting back as a pack. Elira cut a destroyer clean in half, then spiraled toward another ship, her tail a whip of fire that left molten scars across its hull. She was fast, but now the humans were faster, anticipating her movements, punishing any ship that dared turn its weapons on her. The tide began to bend. Explosions dotted the void, enemy vessels breaking apart under the combined assault. For every human ship that burned, 2 Draken ships fell in return. But the flagship remained. It loomed at the edge of the battle like a black mountain, untouched, its energy reserves dwarfing everything else in the field. It had not even moved yet, simply watching, waiting. Mark knew predators when he saw them. The Draken commander wasn't desperate. He was patient. The smaller ships were bait, forcing Elira to spend herself before unleashing the true weapon. He leaned over his console. "They're herding us toward the flagship." The tactical officer looked up sharply. "What do we do, sir?" Mark stared at the massive warship, its cannons glowing faintly. His chest tightened, but his answer came firm. "We stop running." He keyed into the open channel again. "All ships, form a spearhead. Push everything toward the flagship. Elira, if you can hear me, strike with us, not alone." For a moment, he feared she hadn't heard. Then her voice came through the static, faint but steady. "Together." The fleet surged forward. The Draken ship scrambled to intercept, but the humans forced their way through in a brutal wedge. Elira blazed at the tip of the spear, her flame carving a path through the blockade. Behind her, human cannons spat red fury into the holes she opened. The enemy flagship finally moved. Its colossal bulk shifted, jaws of steel opening, unleashing swarms of smaller craft that poured into the battlefield like hornets from a nest. Boarding alarms blared across iron resolve. The ship shuddered as grappling harpoons tore into its hull. Within seconds, Draken soldiers flooded the corridors, hulking figures with scales like armor, wielding blades crackling with plasma. Mark unstrapped, grabbing his rifle. "Bridge has the con!" he snapped, sprinting toward the inner decks. His boots pounded the metal floors as the ship quaked around him. He found the first wave near the reactor chamber, massive warriors smashing through bulkheads, roaring in guttural unison. Mark didn't hesitate. His rifle barked, plasma bolts punching through the closest creature's chest. It toppled, claws raking sparks as it fell, but more came. Always more. He fought through the smoke and chaos, barking orders to Marines, pulling wounded crew back with one arm while firing with the other. Every hallway became a killing ground. Humans fought tooth and nail, bayonets flashing when ammunition ran dry. Above it all, the comms crackled with Elira's strained breaths, each one followed by another explosion outside the hull. She was still holding the line, but every second cost her more. Mark kicked open a hatch, clearing another corridor, and for a heartbeat he let himself look through a viewport. Elira burned brighter than ever, but her movements were faltering. The flame was tearing her apart, and the flagship was bearing down, its massive cannons charging for another killing strike. Mark wiped blood from his face, heart pounding. The fight wasn't over, not inside the ship, not outside. But the enemy had made a mistake. They thought they were hunting a lone flame. What they didn't understand was that humans had already claimed it as their own, and predators that corner humans don't live long. The ship was a war zone. Every corridor shook with the thud of boots, the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded. Iron resolve bled from a dozen wounds, atmosphere venting through fractured bulkheads, fires raging unchecked. The Draken were everywhere, hulking shadows filling the smoke. Claws scraping sparks as they tore through steel to reach human flesh. Mark fought until his arms burned, rifle clattering hot against his shoulder. His Marines fell one after another beside him, but no one broke. They fought like cornered wolves, bayonets thrust into reptilian throats, grenades primed at arm's length before detonating point blank. Still, the Draken kept coming. Mark ducked under a swing, plasma blade carving the air where his head had been. He slammed his rifle's butt into the beast's jaw, felt bone crack, then emptied 3 rounds into its chest. It dropped, twitching, only for another to leap over the corpse with a roar. The battle was endless. And above it all, the ship trembled with every strike outside, where Elira still burned. But she couldn't hold forever. Mark heard her return before he saw her, an otherworldly howl echoing down the hangar bay, carried on a gust of heat that rolled through the ship like a storm. He forced his way there through blood and wreckage, his boots slipping on smeared metal. Elira collapsed through the blast doors, blue fire guttering along her tail. Her body was shaking, her skin pale beneath the glow, eyes dim like a dying star. She staggered forward, then crumpled, barely catching herself on one knee. Mark was at her side in seconds, grabbing her before she fell completely. The heat seared his skin, but he didn't let go. "You can't keep doing this," he hissed. "It's killing you." Her lips moved, barely audible over the alarms. "If Flame dies, Draken win?" "No," Mark shot back, tightening his grip. "You're not a weapon we throw away. If you burn out here, they'll just find someone else to chase." Her eyes met his then, glowing faintly through the haze. There was no anger, no argument, only weary acceptance. "Better me than your people." Mark shook his head hard. He had heard soldiers talk like that before, men ready to throw their lives away for the mission. But he had never seen someone carry fire inside their own body, never seen sacrifice carved so deep it threatened to consume her whole. And he realized something. She wasn't just fighting the Draken. She was fighting herself, her own gift tearing her apart every time she used it. The ship rocked violently, throwing them both against the wall. The intercom screamed warnings, flagship cannon charging. Structural collapse imminent. Mark's jaw clenched. He saw no salvation in the guns, no miracle waiting in the fleet's broken lines. If the flagship fired again, humanity's last defense would be gone. Unless... He looked down at her tail. The blue flame flickered weakly, as if desperate for fuel. His burned hand hovered above it. The heat was unbearable, like pressing against the heart of a star. But then he remembered what she had said. "Every time I fight, I die more." What if she didn't fight alone? Mark pressed his palm against the tail. The fire roared. Elira gasped, convulsing as though shocked, but then her eyes widened, not in pain, but in disbelief. The blue energy surged up her tail, spilling into Mark's veins. His body jerked as light carved through him, racing into every nerve, every heartbeat. It should have killed him. It should have burned him hollow, but instead the flame settled, balanced, shared. Elira's hand shot up, gripping his arm. Her eyes blazed brighter, the exhaustion lifting in an instant. She whispered one word, reverent, astonished. "Together!" The ship around them shook again, Draken claws pounding closer. The flagship's cannon whining to its peak. Mark staggered to his feet, dragging her up with him, blue fire bleeding from his skin like cracks in stone. His veins glowed, his breath steaming, his every movement thrumming with raw power that was not his own. The Marines who had survived the boarding fight froze, staring wide-eyed as Mark and Elira stood side by side, flames dancing between them. The enemy stormed through the breached bulkhead. A dozen Draken warriors howled, weapons raised. Mark raised his hand. Blue fire erupted, flooding the corridor in a tidal wave of light. The Draken were ash before they hit the ground. The soldiers behind him shouted in disbelief, their fear replaced with something else, hope. For the first time since the battle began, they believed they could win, and as the flagship's cannon finally unleashed its killing strike, Mark and Elira turned toward it together. The Draken flagship's cannon lit up the void, a white-hot lance that could shatter moons. It carved toward the iron resolve, tearing apart every smaller ship in its path like they were paper. Nothing in the human arsenal could stop it. No shield, no gun, no desperate maneuver. But Mark and Elira stood at the shattered viewport side by side, fire dancing from their bodies into the vacuum. Where their hands touched, the flames grew brighter, merging into a storm of light. His human stubbornness, her alien power, it fused into something new, something neither had ever known. The cannon struck. Instead of obliterating the ship, the beam bent, folding around them as if the universe itself rejected the shot. The blue fire wrapped around the blast, eating into it, devouring the energy and turning it into fuel. Mark felt it inside his chest like his heart was a reactor, every beat pushing more flame outward. He roared, not in pain but in defiance. Humanity's defiance! Elira joined him, her voice carrying an ancient, haunting echo. The two flames surged higher until the void itself seemed to burn. The cannon snapped apart in a chain of explosions that ripped down the flagship's spine, breaking its mighty weapon in half. The Draken hesitated for the first time. Their fleet, once an unstoppable wave, faltered. Commanders bellowed through their comms, but doubt had already taken root. Mark saw it. "He smelled victory! Push them!" he shouted, voice amplified by the flame that coated him. His Marines rallied instantly, throwing themselves back into the fight with renewed fury. What had been a hopeless defense became a brutal counterattack. Humans surged through corridors and hangars, tearing down warriors twice their size. Outside, the fleet followed their lead. Damaged frigates turned on engines, cruisers poured fire into the wounded Draken line, and the battered Iron Resolve became the spearhead of a charge that split the enemy formation apart. But the flagship wasn't finished. Its main reactor pulsed with a sickly green glow, and Mark felt the shift in the fire's resonance. Something catastrophic was coming. The Draken commander had chosen death before defeat. The ship was priming to self-destruct, to take the human fleet with it in a final blaze of annihilation. Elira's hand tightened on Mark's wrist. Her expression said everything. She knew what had to be done. "No," Mark growled, shaking his head before she could speak. Not alone. Not anymore. Together they launched from the Resolve, blue wings of flame unfurling behind them. The void welcomed them like gods of fire, their bodies wreathed in energy that didn't belong to physics, only to will. The flagship loomed ahead, kilometers of steel and scale, its reactor thundering louder and louder. Mark and Elira dove into its heart, fire searing through hull plating like paper. Draken warriors tried to stop them, but every swing of Mark's arm sent waves of blue inferno tearing them apart. Elira's tail was a scythe of light, cleaving bulkheads and bodies alike. They reached the core. It was a sphere of impossible brightness, energy straining against containment. Seconds from eruption, Elira turned to him, eyes like twin suns. "This will burn everything inside us." Mark grinned through blood and fire. "Good. Then let's make it count." They clasped hands and hurled themselves into the reactor. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, detonation. Not destruction, but transformation. Their combined fire didn't just ignite the reactor, it rewrote it. Blue light cascaded through the flagship, ripping through systems, devouring every circuit, every weapon, every trace of the Draken war machine. The explosion blossomed into a star, consuming the flagship in a blinding supernova that rolled across the battlefield. Every Draken ship caught in its wake disintegrated. Those on the edge fled, their commanders screaming for retreat. The war was over in a single strike. When the light faded, only wreckage remained. Wreckage and silence. Humanity's battered ships drifted among the debris, their crews staring wide-eyed at the miracle they had just witnessed. But Mark and Elira were gone, or so it seemed. Hours later, search teams found them floating amid the ruins. Unconscious but alive, their bodies scarred yet unbroken. The flame had spared them, though it no longer burned as it had before. When Mark awoke in the med bay, the first thing he saw was Elira at his side, her tail curled around the bed, faint embers still flickering. She met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled without pain. "You shared my fire," she whispered. Mark chuckled weakly, voice rough. You'd have done the same. Besides, someone had to make sure you didn't steal all the glory, she laughed. The sound alien yet beautiful, echoing in the quiet. Beyond the medbay's window, Earth's flagships rallied, carrying news of victory back to every human world. The war had nearly ended them, but they had endured. Not because of stronger weapons, not because of luck, because humanity had refused to bow. Mark closed his eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking him, but a thought lingered as sleep claimed him. The galaxy would never forget what happened that day. The humans had stood against extinction and lit the stars with their flame.